I'm Dr. Pamela Kryskow, I'm a board member of the Canadian Psychedelic Association, and we welcome you all here today. We are going to be talking about the changes from Health Canada that came in on January 5th to the Special Access Program. And joining me today here is Michael Kydd from Kydd Group. He is a policy analyst. And also joining is Scott Bernstein, the Executive Director of MAPS Canada. And we're going to jump right in. Got a lot to cover. And so I will hand it over to Michael to further introduce himself and start off, and then Scott, yourself as well, to further introduce yourself.
Thanks very much for that, Pam. And it's really good to see so many people from across the country and into the United States as well, who are really interested in the regulatory amendments that were introduced by Health Canada in the Canada Gazette last week. I apologize right off the top. My dog is craving my attention right now. Everybody knows that when I'm on a call like this, my dog usually becomes part of that call. So I am certainly honored, thrilled to be here. A big fan of CPA, been involved with the CPA for the last year. Some really, really amazing work is happening, not just on the overall membership side, but some big changes coming down the road, which Pam will share. So don't be afraid to reach out after this call if you want to know more about the CPA as well. Pick my brain. I've got some interesting things to share about where I see this program having an overall impact. I will bring a policy angle and a policy lens along with a political lens to this, because I think in consideration of a lot of the incremental steps that have been taken around access to psychedelic drugs and medicines, are certainly indicative of what Health Canada's thinking, what government's thinking, and in order to understand that process for over the past year and what we're going to see over the next couple of years, we also have to understand the political climate and how that's impacting that decision making at the table. So thanks very much. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, hi. Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Bernstein. I'm a lawyer. I'm the executive director of MAPS Canada. I'm coming to you from Vancouver, unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and I'm really happy to participate as well. I think definitely when regulatory changes come in any form, it's always exciting, and there are a lot of questions, and it's really useful to unpack what's real, what's speculative, what we might expect that happens. So I'm happy to contribute my ideas as well and thoughts about that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Michael and Scott, we'll hand it right over to you, Michael. Why don't you start in and bring us up to speed on what.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to acknowledge a lot of the work that's been done over the last couple of years from folks like Dr. Kryskow and a lot of the medical practitioners and researchers and scientists and neuropharmacologists, you name it, who have been instrumental. And even on the business side, organizations, companies like Numinous have been instrumental in helping to lead Health Canada to making the decision that it made on December 12th of last year. December 12th of 2020. Keep forgetting we're already into 2022. And the fact that we had Health Canada offering and giving the public an opportunity to talk about the Special Access Program and how they were going to regulate and make amendments to the changes that under the Harper government, a lot of people were somewhat perplexed and confused over the ability to restrict access to certain drugs for use under the Special Access Program. So a lot of work went into that process, and there was a consultation, as most of you on the call may or may not be aware, where the government of Canada under Health Canada had met and received submissions on Special Access Program to get a clearer understanding of where industry stood and what they wanted to see with respect to actually bringing some of these drugs into the fold for special access and giving doctors the opportunity to provide these drugs to patients who were suffering from a treatment-resistant depression or treatment-resistant illness. And what we ended up seeing was the fact that the government has taken an incremental approach They were very clear in their January 5th communication that, this isn't a step in the right direction. And again, they're very clear about that. And there's a reason why. And I think the key understanding to better acknowledge what Health Canada is trying to accomplish here is that they are taking this in a very incremental approach for one big reason. They've had issues of consequence in the past on the legal side. They want to have a clearer understanding on efficacy and safety and proper supply, safe supply to the market that will grant access to doctors who wish to be able to access the special access program for their patients when they're in need. So, I think we're at a point where people are excited. A lot of people heralded, companies, researchers, the media talked openly about how this was a successful day and a really good day for the special access program, and more importantly for the development of psychedelic medicines as we move forward. But there's still a lot of questions, and I think that's one of the things that we might be able to address later in the call. But there are still a lot of questions that people have around access and income inequality, a bunch of different things that I think are fair that we have to discuss if we're going to actually see what the true value of the benefits are of the special access program.
All right, thanks. Scott, do you want to jump in and maybe bring us through a little bit of how you interpret these changes, or Michael, who would like to jump in?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in a little bit, and I think the media, some of the media reports around these changes has been inaccurate. I think there was one headline of, basically like Health Canada opens up the gateway to access psychedelics for Canadians. And I think that's a bit inaccurate of what this program actually does. And so I think just some context, I'm sure, there's a lot of people listening on the call. Just for the sake of everybody being on the same platform, the special access program, I'll just give a little background of it. The special access program is set up for doctors specifically to request, or physicians to request on behalf of patients access to drugs that are not yet available or FDA approved in Canada. And so in order to meet these qualifications, the patient has to have a serious or life-threatening disease or illness. And also they have to have tried and found unsuitable existing medications, or the things that they're trying to get are unavailable in Canada. So I think when we look at that, I think we sort of start narrowing the pie a bit of what types of conditions and patients would be suitable to it, what types of situations where there's a relationship with a physician and a patient would make it applicable, and then also like what the specific what the specific things they're treating, or the nature of the illness or the problem that's trying to be remedied is going to be in effect. And so I think when we come down to it, the answer is it's not a wide open door of access. It's maybe a hallway that certain people will have access to, and that's great. I think that's good. But as Michael said, Health Canada doesn't see this as this is not legal regulation of psychedelics. This is not this is not the be all and end all. It's perhaps not a step. They really leaned back on. When making this announcement, they lean back on the fact like this doesn't replace clinical trials of psychedelics or other drugs that are would be otherwise available through the special access program. So I think it's just it's sort of I think it's really useful. This webinar is really useful to unpack sort of some of the nuance of this program. And I think if there's a lot of healthcare professionals on the call who are interested in accessing this for their patients, or if there's others on the call who want this for themselves, it's really important to understand a bit of what those parameters are.
Do either of you want to jump in and just to give a wider
Yeah, I think that's a great assessment, Scott. And one of the things that Health Canada has been very clear on is that this is not a pathway to legalization or even decriminalization of psychedelics. When they restricted access under the Harper government in 2013, prior to that announcement and those regulatory changes, there had never been a single request through the Special Access Program for a psychedelic treatment, psychedelic therapy. And as Scott and I were talking earlier before this call, and he's absolutely right, that's because the research wasn't there. We weren't talking 7 years ago, 8 years ago about psychedelic therapies having a massive impact on those with treatment-resistant depression and other types of illnesses, end-of-life palliative, and now we're seeing non-palliative issues. I think the question that a lot of us have, and I know with respect to some of my clients, they've asked a very, very good question. And that is who's going to get access to these drugs under the Special Access Program? And the fact is that over the last 2, maybe 3 years is when we've started to see a massive shift in media attention around psychedelic therapies. And yet a lot of people still don't understand them or truly get how they impact people's overall mental health, whether they're at end of life and palliative or whether they're non-palliative and just suffering from some form of treatment-resistant depression. So the question then becomes, and if there are physicians on this call, I'm certainly would love to hear your feedback on this. The question then becomes, if I'm from Nova Scotia, so I'll just kind of use that as an example. If a family physician in Little Bedford, Nova Scotia, where I'm from, has a stage 4 lung cancer, metastatic lung cancer patient who has heard something about the Special Access Program and psychedelic therapies, and they approach their family doctor and say, I really want to try this because my prognosis isn't good, but I want to really restore the quality of my life with my family over these remaining weeks that I have. That doctor may not understand psychedelics or truly have an understanding of how the Special Access Program works. Therefore, you have the doctor who is possibly not going to be as mobile or as advanced in trying to get the information, filling out the paperwork just to get that patient onto a list and accessing manufacturers who are going to be able to provide psilocybin within the country. Yet you then have patient B who is presenting with, say, suicidal ideation, has attempted to take their life 3 or 4 times, has been through every single therapy possible. And that individual, that patient, could easily be seen from a psychiatrist or the family doctor as somebody who has treatment-resistant issues. How do we determine and judge who gets access to psilocybin under the Special Access Program? Is it patient A with metastatic lung cancer with 3 months to live? Or is it patient B who's presenting suicidal and needs to get access to something that can potentially relieve some of that depression? That is going to be a constitutional issue. That's why we need regulations to move forward as soon as possible. And we're working really hard on those in 2022.
Completely agree. Thanks, Michael. And Scott, maybe you want to start here and Michael jump in as well. So just to give a bigger umbrella, can you compare and contrast how you interpret what the difference between the Section 56 exemptions that are happening now and have been happening and the SAP as it relates to psychedelic medicine access? Scott?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think people are aware, they've at least heard the term Section 56. So that refers to Section 56 of the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, which allows the health minister, the federal health minister, to grant exemptions to the criminal law. And that's the criminal law prohibiting possession, distribution, supply, all of these things to anybody. So there's a really wide discretion for the purpose of a pilot medical study, for a purpose of a scientific study, a medical issue, or in the public interest. And so to date, there have been almost 100 Section 56 exemptions that have been granted around access to psilocybin therapy in Canada. And the Special Access Program, so these are typically vetted through Health Canada in the first place, as Special Access Program will also be vetted through a different part of Health Canada. But I think, we look at the special access program, it's a bit more institutionalized, less political of a decision, perhaps. But some of the issues are probably going to still translate, which is largely, these exemptions, whether it comes through special access or through the Section 56, don't provide an immediate route for access to safe supply of the substance in question. And so what's happened is people get an exemption for psilocybin, but don't actually have a legal route to access psilocybin. And so that's going to probably be a problem now, as far as I know, we don't have any domestic production of MDMA in Canada. And so, we're talking about going through other arms of the government, typically the Office of Controlled Substances, to get permission to import, and all kinds of questions around how you store the substance, because it's still a controlled substance. So you have all these requirements around, safes and access and other types of things that you have to do. So I think, it's not a like, oh great, I got an exemption of one sort or another. There's still further steps that are going to be required to access the substances legally. And so that's some of the similarities. In difference, I think, I think part of what Health Canada is trying to do here with the special access program is maybe move some of these requests into more of a institutional or arm's length type of a decision process for people, build up an economy of scale, I think. But yeah, maybe Michael has something to add to that.
Yeah, and look, I'm going to be the first to say this. This is a good day. This is a good day for industry. Consider where we were 5 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, nothing on the radar. The fact that Health Canada took the time in December of 2020 to strike a public consultation to listen to industry. They received almost 350 submissions, of which one organization had 922 signatures to that submission. Majority, I think they said well over 80% of the submissions they received were on psychedelics, whether it was on legalization, decriminalization, or even just the special access program. There is some confusion, but I want to tell you, Health Canada has heard us loud and clear. Make no mistake about that. We have a Section 56 process that has, for the most part, worked successfully. It's providing some level of relief and access to patients who are at end of life. And through the hard work of a lot of organizations over the last few months, we're starting to see that process open through Section 56 for patients who are non-palliative. So this is a significant shift in policy that we're starting to see with Health Canada. But I just want to quickly read you something in the Canada Gazette that I was just absolutely stunned by in a positive way. Here's what Health Canada said. Many submissions described the mental health status of Canadians as being poor and commented that the existing treatment options for many mental health disorders are limited, relatively ineffective, and or accompanied by negative side effects. It's in reference to SSRIs. In these cases, respondents felt that psychedelic restricted drugs would provide a promising therapeutic option that should be available to patients. The outcomes of this consultation suggested that there was strong public interest in the use of psychedelic restricted drugs for therapeutic purposes. Wow. The fact that we have Health Canada on 3 occasions over the last year coming out publicly talking about the special access program, which is based on an emergency, based as an option of last resort. We have to remember that. We cannot take advantage of it, but they've come out and said that the science and the efficacy is there and has changed since 2013. That's number one. Number two, they're now talking about the impact that it's having on the mental health of Canadians. And number three, and Pam, you were there for this, I believe, in August of this year, of last year, so 2021, on a call about the special access program and other regulatory changes, Health Canada identified and verified without any conditions that treatment-resistant depression is considered by their department a serious or life-threatening condition. So we have this whole new process where Health Canada has has acknowledged that for a serious or life-threatening illness to be reported or maintained by a physician on a patient, then we have the potential to open that door and really get that patient the service that they need through the special access program, as opposed to waiting for potentially months under the Section 56 process.
I just want to clarify there, because I've had a couple private messages come directly to me just to clarify. So under Section 56, the application is coming from the patient. And then under the special access program, that application is coming from the physician, but I also believe it is any primary health care provider, such as a nurse practitioner or physician's assistant, Michael?
Correct.
It includes any healthcare provider, any primary care provider or specialist provider.
Well, they both, the Section 56 and the special access are both of the primary healthcare or practitioner. If you have the authority to prescribe medicines, though. That's the thing. You have to have the authority to prescribe, right? That's the difference. That's the fundamental difference. So your healthcare practitioner, a nurse cannot write a prescription through the special access program and apply for your treatment. It has to come from a medical. So it's going to depend province to province, right? I don't really know. I know here in BC, nurse practitioners can prescribe. I don't know if that's the case across Canada or. That's a great question.
It's province to province, depending, because it's a provincial regulation. But the other clarifying part is that under Section 56, for example, for psilocybin, the patient is procuring their own. Right. Whereas under the SAP, the physician is now going to be needing to put into that application from which company that has a dealer's license from Health Canada and can provide that medicine.
Right. So that's actually going to be a problem, right? Like I think if you have a Section 56, you're sort of, theory good to go. Providing you're accessing something that's widely available like psilocybin, and you're okay with the sources you're able to find for that. If you actually have to put down a licensed producer of psilocybin or MDMA who's authorized within Canada, like right now, I think you're scratching your head a bit because there aren't, as far as I know, there aren't any, and so that's going to be they're on the line, right? Like there are companies that are working to get to that point, but they haven't yet. And the other difference is also Section 56, because it's so broad. Section 56 applications can be made on behalf of a class or a group of patients, which I think ultimately, like that's the efficiency of it. Is I can say, first responders, for example, who have depression or a condition as a class of people. With the special access program, there's no opportunity to do that. It's only one-to-one, one patient, one request.
No, you can actually. I thought the same thing, Scott, and I read it earlier. You can apply for more.
Okay.
Under the special access program.
That's good to know.
Yeah, well, and to your point about Section 56 exemptions, let's not forget why we're looking at these changes to the special access program, because the Section 56 process isn't working. And Health Canada, to their credit, I mean, they need to see efficacy, they need to see safety, they need to see the research through clinical trials. But it takes time, it takes money, it takes intensive resources. We all know that. So what did they do? They received a massive influx of patients applying through the Section 56 process after those 4 patients, like Thomas Hartle, were granted their exemptions in August of 2020. So what did that do? It put them in a position where they needed to figure out a better solution to this. So they looked at the special access program, kept it at a case-by-case basis, but they started to encourage people, companies, organizations, researchers, institutions, you name it, to apply through the clinical trials process. And that bought them some time, with all due respect. And that's the political decision. It's a very smart decision. The last point I want to make about the special access program, the difference between SAP and the Section 56, is, to Scott's point, liability. So patient A is obtaining psilocybin from the gray-black market and receiving their therapy through a qualified practitioner. But when a medical practitioner or a doctor has decided to request a drug through the special access program, that practitioner assumes the liability and the responsibility for that drug. And that includes how it's administered and how it's transported. That's the fundamental difference that does cause a little bit of red tape for the doctor.
It actually creates quite a bit, because we should move into how do you actually get that. So I've talked with a number of companies in the last few days, asking them directly, do you know directly with your dealer's license, are you able to provide for SAP? What are you guys hearing?
Scott, do you want to, or?
I don't know. My understanding is not yet. I think, but that's maybe I don't have up-to-date information on it.
So the answer to that is from what my clients have shared with me is prior to the release of the information. So an email went out in December 21st, of course, right before Christmas. It went out saying that there were going to be changes announced, regulatory changes announced on January 5th. And at that time, companies who have already received their dealer's license and some who are in the process of having that approved, received confirmation from Health Canada that they would be considered and or approved to be put on a list of manufacturers who could supply the special access program. Where that stands right now, I'm not sure, but I do know that companies have been approached and asked if they would consider supplying. And from what I can tell you from just talking to some of my clients and some other folks in the industry, is that they're ready to meet that demand. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's a really good thing. I think it's good for business, but I also think it's good for patients, because we're looking at a variety of different strains of psilocybin that could have an impact, may not have an impact, but I think we're going to learn. And this is part of that whole learning process and the research process as we go through the special access program.
Yeah, and I would just clarify on that when we're talking about what level the dealer's licenses, there's a number of levels. You have an analytical, which is just a small amount, which you can analyze for constituents, et cetera. And then there is the ability to supply for phase 1 and phase 2. And then there is the ability to the manufacturing to supply for phase 3 human trials. So there's 3 different levels. So that there's going to be a little confusion around that. I think there's a lot of companies that are startup in this area and maybe don't quite understand that there's a level of, at least in my conversations with many of these companies, is they're assuming that their analytical lab will get them to providing for SAP. And I don't think that's accurate, but I'll wait to hear that directly from Health Canada.
Yeah, to that point, drugs that are accessed through the special access program do not undergo, to your point, Pam, I think, which is very, very important. They won't undergo the scrutiny of a benefit risk assessment from Health Canada. And that is part of the overall regulatory framework for new drug submissions or a clinical trial. So, these drugs are exempt from the Food and Drugs Act and its regulations. That's key. And the decisions to authorize a drug through the special access program are actually based on the medical practitioner's rationale about the use of the drug and the medical emergency that it is that's being considered for the benefit of the patient and on the patient's clinical history. So, there's all kinds of variables that are at play. How they're determined from someone sitting in a Health Canada office is, I think, anyone's guess right now.
Right. I want to move through some of the questions, and I want to bring this one to Scott. And Scott, it's going to take us backwards and then bring us forwards here. So you talked a bit earlier before we got on the call about, how we even got here with the special access, why these medicines were taken out of special access previously, and now they're coming back in. And I want to tie that into the question. There's a question here about the term psychedelics. Now, the term psychedelic is not in the SAP. Do you want to explain that? And then also maybe talk a little bit about the history of it, even how we got here, and then what are actually the terms that are in the SAP?
Sure. So the the Gazette link that I shared in response to a question or in the chat that was the announcement here says that nobody had ever requested a restricted drug before, and that's actually not true. And so the restricted drugs, they're listed in a pretty obscure section of the Food and Drug Regulations, which apply to the Food and Drug Act. And it basically, it's a schedule of a list of drugs. And prior to 2013, they just operated as sort of drugs that required just extra care around regulation and thing. It had no relation at all to the Special Access Program. And what happened was, listeners or viewers may be aware of the Salome trial, which was in Vancouver, and testing the efficacy of prescription diacetylmorphine or heroin and prescription hydromorphone for patients with severe substance use disorder or opiate use disorder. And what was happening is this research study was ending in 2013, and the people who had been on it and successful were going to be cut off of access to the medications that were helping them, particularly prescription heroin. And so the doctors there applied through the Special Access Program to access diacetylmorphine for their patients, and they were approved. And so I think in all, there were some 21 approvals that came out of this. But what had happened is, in response, the Harper government had, decided to close this, what they called a loophole. And they basically took this list of restricted drugs and said the Special Access Program can't apply to it. And so that included diacetylmorphine, heroin, but it also included all these other psychedelic drugs that were listed on there. And so the psychedelics got cut off by sort of mistake. And so and someone typed in the chat, stimulant, medication, all sorts of things that were controlled drugs were included on that. So that's sort of where we got. And a few years ago, as the evidence, the clinical trials were progressing around MDMA, and there was more interest in psychedelics, advocates, including our organization, wrote to Health Canada to say it's time to reconsider these, and it's time to make these regulatory changes. As it happens, it takes 2 years for the machinery of the government to turn and make this decision, of which they were largely on board with a long time ago. But so that's a bit of the history of it. The word psychedelic, I think it's I think it can be stigmatizing. I'm more of a preferring, like, let's reclaim it and let's get rid of the stigma through evidence and through proper use of, or like demonstrating positives about the use of psychedelics and therapies, rather than finding some other term, but because it's sort of, people know what it is. But
specifically in the SAP and what was Schedule J, they're not psychedelics, doesn't appear there.
No, it's the chemical name.
Yeah, the technical name. You see MDMA, fully spelled out, LSD, fully the chemical name, psilocybin, psilocin.
Right.
You see those. So you don't see the word psychedelic in that legislation.
I think that's as a communicator, I do struggle with the word psychedelics. I love the word. I'm going to give a big plug to my good friend, Dr. Erica Dick. I wish she was on this call right now, because she'd give you the best history ever on how the word psychedelics was coined, which was in Canada, by the way. But we do have a community. I've said this many times. We don't have a science problem, although we need more science. We have a communication problem. And it goes to Scott's point. We have to begin the education process. And I think that's where the SAP is of huge significant value, is it gives us an opportunity to reach out to medical associations and explain how this program will impact their patients. So, the other point I wanted to make, going back to 2013, let's not forget, we had a majority conservative government, 2.5 years into its mandate, an election looming. So this announcement was made in 2013, an election looming in 2015. Minister Rona Ambrose stands up and she tossed a plate of red meat to the law and order anti-drug conservative base. And that is what politics are, unfortunately. They then took that process, they fundraised on the back of it, and they appealed to their base leading into 2015. Then you have the new government coming in and the NDP who claim that they would solidify the program once in place. So I will give certainly a good nod to the Liberal government who followed through on that campaign promise. So we have a lot of work to do. Education is paramount to getting better understanding of psychedelics and their compounds and how we actually treat people with those drugs.
Yeah, thank you. This one I think is for you, Michael. I think this is off of something you said earlier. If this is a hallway, halfway, I think they meant halfway, rather than a direct pathway to medical legalization, what do you see that, well, this hallway looking like? It's hard for me to fathom that these won't eventually be legalized for medical use. Yeah,
it's funny. I was just looking at that question and I love the term hallway. I'd never considered that before. So that's an excellent term. It is. That's the way I think we as policy analysts, regulatory communicators, lawyers, we have to look at this from two perspectives. And what is going to be the best way to get these drugs legalized for control access? And Pam was there, Paul Stamets, Ronan Levy, Paul Lewin, some powerful people in the psychedelics industry. And we met with Health Canada back in November, and we talked to them about what that actually looks like and what that legal process actually means to Canadians. And the one thing we really, really hit home is the fact that Health Canada need to consider safety and safe supply. So, we have an obligation over the coming months to sit down, and we will be sitting down with Health Canada to really, really push hard on how important it is to provide a safe supply, because Canadians are already accessing these naturally growing mushrooms in the forest and foraging. And as Paul Stamets said in that meeting, and I 100% believe him, is it won't take much for someone to walk into a forest, pick a mushroom that looks like a psilocybin mushroom, and it actually be poisonous. That will do irreparable harm to the industry and to what we're trying to accomplish here around psychedelics. So we have to have safe access, whether that's on a natural compound or a synthetic process. There has to be something in place. So that hallway is just actually not getting longer, it's getting shorter. We're working hard to get that done, and we will see MDMA, we will see psilocybin legalized in the coming years. Hopefully we get some form of legalized controlled access for palliative and end-of-life patients, and eventually non-palliative within the next 6 months. That's what we're really working for.
Yeah, I would just like to chime in. I think the case, I agree, the end result has to be legal regulation, but I would actually say the case for legal regulation comes from the absolute atrocious failure of drug prohibition. And we've tried this experiment for over 100 years with countless people are dying of the unprecedented rate of opioid poisoning deaths that are just skyrocketing out of control and exacerbated by COVID, people being imprisoned, stigma, and like this, the system does not work. And the logical conclusion of this is legal regulation of all drugs. And as a society, we regulate everything, right? We regulate driving, all kinds of dangerous activities, driving and skydiving and prescription medicines and, all types of things. And it's drugs as a category that we've sort of thrown up our hands and allowed to proliferate just in this unregulated atmosphere. And it creates danger for anybody who's using substances, whether that's a psychedelic you're choosing to use, or it's at young people trying to use MDMA at festivals or raves, or it's people who are injecting what they think is heroin, but it's actually fentanyl or something. And so I think I'm one. I think psychedelics should be legalized. I don't really like drug exceptionalism. I think we should be thinking about the whole systemic issue of prohibition and the mechanisms. And I just think the logical conclusion here is that we legally regulate and the government takes control of these substances to the betterment of all of us for public health and public safety.
If I, Pam, just before you go on, if I can add to that, I had a brilliant conversation with Andrew Galloway with Dimensions Health a few days ago, and he said something that really stuck with me. He said, we can send kids to Iraq and to Afghanistan and all over the world to be psychologically scarred and traumatized for the rest of their lives. Yet we can't trust them enough to ingest a mushroom with therapy or some form of psychedelic with therapy, and as a way and a means to improve their lives. That's BS, if you ask me. We have to be better, and it's to Scott's point of having full legalization so that we can be a lot better than that, be more humane than that. We can't keep sending these kids, these men and women, over to these countries to fight the wars and end up coming home broken people. And we have to be able to fix that and trust the government, trust the process, trust the people who are supplying to make that medicine work so that we can improve the overall mental health of our world.
Right, absolutely. And I think we're seeing a lot more movement. And I think a lot of times we see in the conversation, I'm seeing it in some of the chat, that, oh, who's going to prescribe? Doctors don't prescribe. Who's going to be good enough to do all this? I mean, we're having this conversation because people are interested. I'm a physician. I'm interested. All my colleagues, I don't have one physician colleague that is not interested in the potential of psychedelic medicines at all anymore. And that's a huge change, I would say. I would say that we have seen the tipping point, and it's only a matter of time before people know somebody like within one arm's length that has benefited somewhere from some form of a psychedelic medicine. So I think we're really seeing this, and I think we can start to begin to drop they're not going to prescribe it, or the doctors aren't interested, or the healthcare system's not interested. I think the healthcare system is interested. Here we are, right? And there's a question from Catherine Wynn. Catherine, a little shout out to her. She's in the Right to Try in the US. She's a lawyer. Before I go on with her question, though, I also want to jump on something you said earlier, Michael, about Erica Dick. Dr. Erica Dick, she is a brilliant historian. We have a webinar that we did with her on the CPA not too long ago. And if you Google her, she has many wonderful webinars with other organizations as well. It's worth listening to her. When you know history, then you know what's happening now, and you can understand it a lot better. And especially Canada has a proud history with it when it comes to psychedelic medicines.
Buy her book,
anyway,
Wonder Drug, buy her book.
Yes, it is a great book. And Catherine asks about how easily would we expect to access MDMA under the SAP? And will the SAP be involved with assuring that MDs requesting this special access have adequate training, i.e. the MAPS training, or will you be vetted through a different agency or board? I will answer the second question, and then I'll toss you guys the first one. So whatever you do, whether you're an MD, a nurse, a naturopath, whatever, this is a provincially regulated responsibility in Canada. And so as long as you have the training and it falls within your scope of practice, you can do a therapy. If you have psychedelic therapy training, you can do it as a nurse or a doctor or a psychotherapist. If you have, you may not necessarily need to have MDMA training, but psychotherapy or other things that go in that. So it's a matter of competence. And if you have the competence, you can do it under your regulated profession. And so you're not necessarily going to need to have MDMA training per se, as long as you have psychedelic-assisted therapy training, which may be extrapolated out to MDMA or psilocybin. So I'll leave it there, and then I'll pass it on. Do we expect that we'll see MDMA access under SAP?
Absolutely. I think that's primarily the issue that they're trying to solve. I think, as people know, we're in phase 3. The trials are wrapping up. We actually see FDA approval on the horizon as happening in the next couple of years. I think this is a mechanism that's parallel to what happens in the US, where when a drug is sort of like, it looks like it's going to work, it's look like we're going to approve it, they sort of open up a bit of the access to a wider range of patients. And I think that's exactly what's going to be happening here. Is I think there will be approvals and requests and approvals specifically around MDMA. Again, the issue is like where the MDMA is going to be sourced from and other logistical problems that will have to be addressed. But I think that's, MDMA would be an excellent candidate for what the SAP is designed to do, and particularly around things like treatment-resistant PTSD.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I want to say, Catherine, you are an inspiration for the work that you continue to do around Right to Try and all the work you've done on Measure 109 in Oregon and all the work that's being done across the United States. So keep up the good work, and we definitely have to connect again. I think Scott's absolutely right. We're probably closer to MDMA, and I say that in jest because if you look at what's happened just in the last month and a half with, I think we're up to 12 non-palliative cases, patients that have been granted access to psilocybin through Section 56 exemptions. That's pretty big. It's a policy signal, as I said earlier, from Health Canada. Whether or not it's intended, we don't know, but I think it is a really, really good way to determine the thinking around the board at Health Canada on how we have to eventually get MDMA and psilocybin into the hands of the patients who need full access to them. So we probably will see it, but a lot of the attention's around psilocybin right now because of end of life distress. That's kind of been the push, but you'll start to see a seismic shift in the discussion between psilocybin and MDMA in the next few months.
Right. I think what I've seen is that we expect that we will see MDMA possibly available by 2023. I think that, when I talk to MAPS USA, and I'm Scott's closer to them than I am, but that seems to be the likelihood. And I believe actually Health Canada has given exclusivity to MAPS Public Benefit Corporation to be the provider of MDMA, which I think right now is coming from the UK, ironically. But I could be wrong on that. So we'll see that coming down, and they're further along, right? We're in phase 3 trials with MDMA, and I think only just starting like phase 3 with the psilocybin extract, not psilocybin mushrooms. Okay. So some of these questions have been answered, but some people may be joined late and didn't hear the answers. Is SAP only extended to medical doctors, or has Health Canada approved other healthcare practitioners? And I believe what we've answered there is you have to have the ability to prescribe, right? Okay.
You have to have the ability to prescribe, but the regulations are very clear. The doctor prescribes, but the doctor also has to be on site. The doctor has to be there in the room, actually administering the drug. That's
so it can't just be a token, like you get some doctor. It's like not how medical cannabis worked prior to legal regulation.
Right. So that's the difference between the SAP and the Section 56 process. The patient can apply, get access, get their exemption, and then that they can then bring the psilocybin, transport it to the clinic, and have it administered by a qualified therapist. Whereas the SAP, the doctor has to be on site. They have to receive the drug, transport that drug, watch the patient administer it, then they have to destroy it if there's anything left. Doctor has to be there.
Which I think, I think there's a couple of issues around that. If we can think about it, I mean, one is obviously the cost prohibitive. None of this therapy is covered yet under provincial healthcare plans. So that's going to sort of limit who's able to access that, and your costs, if you're involving a physician, are going to go even higher than with a therapist. And then second, it's a bit, there's an access question. A lot of rural communities, Indigenous communities within Canada don't have access to physicians regularly. It's sort of a not very often practice where a physician, mostly it's a nurse practitioner or a nurse who would be in the community, and a physician or a prescriber there irregularly. So I think there's there's some problems there that can be unpacked.
100%, Scott. And this is Pam and I have had this discussion for the last week and a half. look, it's accessibility is huge. We already have a massive shortage in psychiatrists in this country, and I know in the US and likely other countries across the world. And it's even more prohibitive in rural communities, which we need to serve in, whether it's rural Ontario or if we're talking North and Indigenous communities who are suffering much more than a lot of these other communities are. So we do have to find a way to ensure that, it is not cost restrictive, which it does concern me. It's one of the things with the SAP that does concern me is, the physician, the family doctor who wants to give access to a patient, but looks at their socioeconomic status, and maybe it's a single mom who's working 3 jobs to look after 3 children and doesn't have that kind of money to deal with her depression. So, is that a situation where the physician may just say, I'm not going to invest the time because I know that individual can't afford it. And that's where it's inequitable, and we need to make sure that that's addressed.
Well, and part of that addressing that is the clinical trials, as onerous and as expensive as they are. As soon as these medicines go through the clinical trials, then they're available, right? Then you can make the argument that the provincial Medicare in each province or federally, that this should be included in the Canada Health Act, that this is now must be covered, whether it's by your therapist, by your nurse practitioner, by your physician assistant, whoever, right? As soon as we have the data there, then it makes that starts to bring up that access. And I know it's a long process. I get the frustration. I work in rural BC and have worked rurally most of my life, and access is always an issue. And we do have once you start checking off some of those boxes, and that access starts opening up, even though it's a long road.
Yeah, and it would be great, if we were able to engage some of the provincial colleges a bit around psychedelics and the use of psychedelics a bit more. I think there's still a lot of stigma around this class of substances that I think, particularly, many healthcare professional oversight bodies, colleges are very conservative, small c conservative around substances and prescribing. So I think, getting them on board, education programs around what these therapies are, what the trials have shown is going to be really helpful in getting physicians on board with being the person to be in a position to apply and to help their patient.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly a critical component. But I do want to mention one last thing. I know we're kind of running up against the clock here, but there were regulations that were passed on January 1st of this year. And they're the regulations amending the Veterans Healthcare regulations. And, it kind of flew under the radar. And Catherine, this may address some of your question. We all know that there are veteran groups, a lot of veterans who are receiving MDMA to deal with their severe mental health issues, especially around PTSD. And for those of you who aren't really following psychedelics, MDMA seems to be the drug of choice for helping individuals who are struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder. And these regulations came into place on January 1st, and they deal with disability claims from veterans under the Veteran Affairs Act. And we're looking into it right now. I'm not sure it's going to apply, but just reviewing the legislation, and we need to certainly take some more time to review it in a little more depth and speak to some of my legal colleagues. But we want to get an understanding if the special access program is now open to be prescribed from a doctor for a patient, does that mean that the veterans' disabilities benefits will be able to kind of marry over and be amalgamated with the special access program and have those treatments actually funded by Veterans Affairs? And so we're looking into that right now. I'm not trying to get anybody's hopes up, but I think it's certainly worth the investigation. And if we can find some relief for veterans through the special access program and have those disability benefits, have Veterans Affairs pay for these disability benefits under under psilocybin or MDMA assisted psychotherapy, then, we're even, that hallway again has just gotten a lot more shorter, and we're, a few steps ahead.
So I'm going to jump through a few questions here. Kyle asks if there's a difference between the therapeutic differences between strains of mushrooms. More accurately, you'd want to say species of psilocybin containing mushrooms. And no, that's a lot of research to come. There's some groups claiming that they have started that, but I haven't seen any of those trials registered yet at govtrials.com, where you can follow what psychedelic trials are in process right now. But no, that hasn't been done. And yes, that needs to be done. Danny asks, assuming that a practitioner has applied for SAP access, and then would they be protected if the patient brought in their own drugs? Now, I understand SAP, it does not allow that, right? That would be a Section 56 exemption that would allow the patient to bring their own meds, not
Be a
SAP.
violation of the criminal code, correct?
Right. So no, the answer is no coverage for your liability. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to be quite the loosey-goosey environment that a Section 56 was, but we'll see, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, Joseph asks how many physicians in Canada. I would extend that to nurse practitioners, physician assistants have psychotherapy training. There's not a registry for that, so that's impossible to answer, but I mean, it's in part of all their core training, but do they have the training to do psychedelic-assisted therapy? I would say that I'm advocating that every university and college in Canada should start their psychedelic-assisted therapy curriculum. This should be available, just like you can study psychology, just like you can go and do your residency in psychiatry, and just like you can get your clinical counselor skills. I think we're going to see very quickly, probably within, I would say easily before 2030, almost every academic institution in Canada will have some form of psychedelic medicine assisted therapy training. At least that's my wish list. Does Health Canada,
University of Ottawa just announced their master's program, did they not?
Yeah. We got the University of Ottawa is in their spiritual care will be, if not has announced their masters in psychedelic therapy. Vancouver Island University will be announcing their postgraduate certificate in psychedelic medicine assisted therapy, along with a practicum component. And the two programs are collaborating so that taking courses at one will be helpful at the other. So and I imagine that there'll be other universities following suit, and they're probably already in process. It is a long process to get an academic program at a university. So kudos to VIU and the University of Ottawa on that. Does Health Canada have a list of licensed producers to choose from?
Well, they've asked, sorry, Scott, go ahead, Scott.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
They've asked all kinds of companies who would have been part of that email chain and through the inquiry process. So I do know that companies across the country were asked if they would be willing to supply the special access program, and whether they answered yes or no is anybody's guess. But I know a few have said that they would, yes.
A few other, I know we're at time here. Do you guys mind if we go a few minutes over just to run through these final questions here? Is there any indication of requiring details of where the journey is held for any of these medicines? I don't think that's
no. What?
Maybe.
Well, I think they'll ask about it. I think they'll probably want some information about how you're doing it, but I don't think that they have any standards yet and say, you must do it in this particular environment. I don't think that's there yet.
No, and as a physician who has been involved in a Section 56 exemption groups psilocybin mushroom session for 9 people with their exemptions, no, they don't ask that. What they're more concerned about is diversion. What are you going to do with the extra mushrooms? Really is what they're asking. So it's more along.
You mean the mushrooms that people had to go find and bring in themselves illegally? You're asking me now, like, will they that's
Yeah.
that's sort of laughable a little bit, but
So
It is.
diversion from the illegal unregulated market to the illegal unregulated market
Yeah.
is
yeah,
what they're concerned about.
So, the Health Canada is very clear that drugs under the Special Access Program are covered by a class exemption. So we know that. And that basically means that patients, like Scott just said, aren't allowed, they're allowed to transport under Section 56 right now, but they're not permitted to possess or transport restricted drugs. And it has to be used in the presence of a practitioner or a healthcare professional to whom the practitioner has delegated this activity. So I correct myself. I know the doctor has to be on site, but they can, actually, I'm not correcting myself. I did say that. So the therapist can administer, but the doctor has to be there. So I believe under the class exemption, the doctor is allowed to transport to the facility. So if they wanted to go to a facility that currently offers those treatments through their own Section 56 processes, I believe that's where they'll end up going. But again, under the regulations, the framework that we've already pitched to the government, those issues would be null and void if those regulations were implemented by Health Canada in the coming year.
Right, and the suggestion we made to Health Canada, Michael, right, under the MORA, the Memorandum of Regulatory Analysis, is that in these cases that it is the clinic or the location was left to be so that it could be a clinic, it could be a therapy center, it could be a retreat center, as long as all the safety, hospital room, exactly, as long as all the safety parts are taken care of. Like, again, it's about taking care of the patient, making sure the patient or the participant or the client is as safe as possible, and then having the flexibility to have a beautiful setting.
Yeah, and I just want to say a couple of things that, that does illustrate also the flexibility of a Section 56. It doesn't have to be a person or a class of people being exempted. It can be a facility. And so it can be like the example is Insight or supervised consumption sites. It's not, it's basically anybody who walks in the door and consumes drugs is covered under this blanket thing. There could be a parallel to that created around, a site that's a therapy center that has permission to engage. And I want to emphasize that just because the Special Access Program is now in place, the Section 56 is still there. And I feel like we should still be making, what I would talk, boundary pushing requests around how exemptions are made, including things like site specific exemptions or class exemptions for access to different substances that, to sort of push through what some of these barriers to the Special Access Program might be. So I'd like to, these are both still going to be there. We should be still using both mechanisms where appropriate.
Pam, you're the resident expert on group therapy and the impact that has. I'm not going to, just for you to discuss, but I think to Scott's point, we're starting to see more integration through group therapy, and that is going to be critical in the next regulatory framework that is presented to government.
Yeah, absolutely. Kyle asks, do we expect a counseling therapist will be able to offer this legally eventually? I think so. I think that'll be the logical. I think people with the main thing is, do you have the skill set to do high quality psychedelic assisted therapy? And if it's within your skill set and within your regulatory toolbox, then the answer of course will be yes. And perhaps it'll just be, what I envision is that perhaps, I would do the medical clearance, knowing the medical side and the interactions, write the prescription, and the person would then have the therapy with either their physician, their nurse practitioner, their naturopath, their therapist. And as long as the medical clearance has gone through, because that is important, because there are interactions, and that we do need to keep patients safe on that. There is a list of substances that would be, so what, are they still under Schedule J, or where do people see the full list?
Yeah, they're still under Schedule J.
Yeah, I'll try to find the link while you're talking. Okay,
if you could post that. That was a question by Kelly asking what is the list of substances, and Delphine, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. What is the timeline for ketamine insurance in Ontario? That probably depends on how strongly the citizens of Ontario lobby the government of Ontario to cover ketamine therapy. They need to hear from you. You need to get a hold of your MLAs and tell them what you want. That's the best way to get active there. Links to more information accessing MDMA for veterans through VAC.
Ashley, I think just seeing your point there, that's going to have to be after the election in Ontario. I will tell you though, we met with Minister Tabolo, who's the Ontario Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, a few months ago, and they're very receptive to the idea. Ontario is in an election year, which it can be advantageous and be a disadvantage as well. But that's not to say that they won't consider it. They seemed very interested. I know the Nova Scotia government is very interested in psychedelics per se, and therapy, and looking at different pilot programs and projects that we might be able to institute here. But I wouldn't wait for the election. It's going to come in May or June, I believe, in Ontario. Start talking, and I know they're receptive, but yeah, it's sometimes tough when you're a few months out from an election.
Right. And just clarifying, can a site, so in section 56, you can apply as a program or a site, just like Insight did in Vancouver, the safe injection site, safe consumption site. Can a program apply or a site apply for SAP?
I don't think so.
This is the difference between what Harper did in 2013. Scott, help me out here if I'm kind of veering off, but Harper's only problem with the special access program is that the 21 patients were getting access to heroin, and so they shut that loophole down, as Scott alluded to earlier. They shut that loophole down, and now we're at the point where today they're not, the Harper government at the time simply refused to give it to patients. They kept it open for clinical research and trials. Mm-hmm. So that has maintained continuity. So I think today it's anybody's question. I don't have the answer to that, but I would say right now, no, it's strictly related to patient doctor.
Yeah, I think just the nature of like what the special access program is intended to do. Like this is created for, you need a new AIDS medication that's approved in Germany, but it's not here yet, right? It's sort of that kind of, and you're in terminal or you're in serious condition. It's sort of that type of response to, there's a proven drug out there, you're a patient who needs it. So I think the idea of having a site or a facility is sort of quite different than that, because different, unless I just think it's a different circumstance.
What he just said. Exactly.
Well, thank you guys so much. I know I'm going to ask that we can get you back, in a little bit once we get some of the dust settles on this, and maybe we'll have a better idea what we're actually going to really get. And as we hear more from Health Canada, so we'll stop the questions there. Thank you both profoundly. I just want to let Corey know, I saw one of the comments, doctors do not get kickbacks on what we prescribe in Canada. I promise you, it's illegal. It's illegal.
Don't you get like golf trips or things?
No, that used to happen. That used to happen. Yes, it used to happen in the old days. In some places in the US, it still happens. In Canada, it does not happen. You do not get kickbacks for writing prescribes. I'm
sorry.
So I just wanted to let you know that, and it did happen, and that was bullshit. I'll be blunt on it. That should have never happened, and it has been changed. The physicians are not in favor of those kind of conflicts. You always have to put your patient first. You always have to put your patient first. That is why we went into medicine, because we care deeply, and if we're not, hold our feet to the fire. Okay, thanks guys. Thank you, Michael, Kydd. Thank you so much. And Scott Bernstein. So Michael as a policy analysis from Kydd Group, and Scott Bernstein from MAPS Canada, the executive director. And thank you for all of you that came and watched and learned more about the SAP. Wow, who knew so many people were interested in government regulations. All right. Yeah. Everyone have a wonderful evening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.